Thank you for joining us today. I'm David Lawrence from Grant McGregor. We're a managed service provider. We're serving the community here in Scotland and the wider UK with cybersecurity risk assessments, cyber essential assessments, and really just good old-fashioned advice when it comes to cybersecurity. Today, we're going to talk all about cybersecurity and the impact that that has on small, medium enterprises. And I'm so happy that I've got an expert across the pond in the US, uh, somebody with some great experience and knowledge to share. So I'm excited to introduce ZB from Bitdefender. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, and thanks for having me, David. Glad to be presenting to your customer base. My name is Zibeon, but I go by ZB. It's a lot easier. I am the Senior Director of Product for MSP at Bitdefender, a global cybersecurity company based out of Europe with offices also in the US. I'm in the US, I'm in Texas, and my experience with cybersecurity and managed service providers has been about 17 years. I served as the lead for the MSSP arm for a large MSP based out of Texas for about 17 years. So very technical background. Started as a help desk tech, worked my way up through engineering and eventually to leadership within the company, leading the security division for Caltech back then, and now with Bitdefender. So very glad to be here and share some conversations with your group.
That's great. I'm super excited to have you here, pick away and get some of your insights and experience. So thank you. I was wondering about how businesses should view cybersecurity in terms of risk versus reward. Maybe you can share some of that with us.
Yeah, I think that's really important is to consider that exactly from that perspective. A lot of small businesses operate very differently than large enterprise, and oftentimes a lot of the information we receive as either owners or operators or even just consumers is the news that makes the headlines, and the news that makes the headlines is large attacks on very large enterprises that are affecting, information for millions of people around the world or around the country. And oftentimes, that's what we think of as the risk is, okay, but we're not a target. I'm a small business. I have, customers nowhere near the size of these organizations. So surely, an attacker is not going to come after me. But in reality, that's actually who they're targeting. It's just not going to make big news because it's not a big attack. And if you think about it from like you're talking about the risk versus reward and effort is attackers are opportunistic. They like easy targets. They may be smaller rewards for them, for the attacker themselves. The payout may be smaller, but it's easier to get to. So if they can attack, 10 small businesses, each of them connecting, speaking in terms of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars per attack, they made a pretty good payday on that with little effort, as opposed to if they go after targeting a large enterprise, it's going to take them a lot more effort to gain that initial access, go undetected, then conduct the attack, and then whether that becomes a ransomware event to get that organization payout. That's a very longer term process for them to conduct that attack, as opposed to a small business where they can, do a phishing attack, get somebody to give them credentials, gain access, and then initiate attacks. Like so, for them, small target, easy payday. And so, I think it's important for small businesses to think about that versus just I'm not a target. So when you look at the risk for that, that's more likely risk for a small business, and that's where partnering as a small business with a resource like yourself that can come in there and really educate about, hey, here's the impact, here's the risk, here's how we mitigate that risk. Because sure, there is cost involved to mitigate, but there's different ways you can mitigate a risk. You can either put in place controls, to secure your system. You put those monitorings in place. In some cases, that may not be enough because we don't know. There's this unknown aspect of a risk, right? And that's where cyber insurance comes into play as well. You outsource some of that risk. So you control what you can control, You put those security measures in place, but then you also have different layers like cyber insurance that helps you protect, the organization in the event that those unknowns do happen. And I think that's kind of important to frame it as, okay, what are the risks that we're protecting against?
That's good. I mean, I think highlighting that it's not all those big organizations that make the certainly in the UK press at the moment, we have some big companies in the last couple of months that have gone through quite public cyber attacks. What's, as you said, what's underreported is the small medium enterprises that are constantly being attacked day in day out. Kind of
Mhm.
more bang for your buck and under the radar. And from your experience, I guess part of the immediate costs of a cyber attack, and that's kind of well reported. But what do you think of the long term, maybe financial consequences to an organization?
Well, you think about it, okay, well, what's the result of the attack on a small organization? Typically, the result or the attack then takes data from the organization. That data may be your customer list, maybe some financial data. From there, then it depends on what was the motive for the attacker. I'll give you an example for our financial customers. Often, what we saw was not an attack that initiated against the bank, the bank organization itself. Typically, the way that we got involved was because an attacker had targeted maybe a business that was conducting business with the bank. And so in those cases, there was emails that get exchanged to change bank account numbers, routing numbers to essentially divert funds. So instead of the
Right.
funds going from the small business to maybe the bank to pay off loans or whatever transactions, or to a vendor for payment, they get those funds get redirected and go to the attacker. So in that cases, it could be damage to business. Your damage then becomes lost funds that were diverted to a different attacker. But then sometimes you can go beyond that. Oftentimes, we would see where attackers would harvest information to continue to perpetrate the attack. They would harvest your customer information or your vendor's information and then continue the attack then, often acting as that initial organization. Well, then that could be a reputational damage to that customer that can be very hard to overcome, especially in the space. Like, what industry is that business in? If it's a shop that's selling widgets. Okay, well, maybe not a big deal. But what if you're a law firm? A lot of the work that you do is in trust, right? And so if your customers lose trust in your abilities, that could have long term damage to that organization in terms of losing customers, lose revenue. It could be very damaging there.
You're right. It's such a, I think it's a thing that most business owners, chief execs, MDs don't really think about. It's that not just the physical cost and the productivity cost, but it's the, as you said, the representational cost of building that market, building that trust, and then suddenly that blowing away by a cyber security incident.
I think there was a phrase, a saying, I forgot the quote now, but it is along the lines, "It takes years to build your reputation and minutes to destroy it." And that's very true, like, in those events of a cyber attack.
And it's the cost, isn't it? I mean, some businesses have been around for, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and quite quickly, depending on how they deal with that challenge or problem, can really affect, the way they do business in the future. Uh, Looking at the small organizations versus larger organizations, the trends that you're seeing, and as we've just talked about, do you want to share any trends or stats that you have?
Yeah, but I think if you are comparing like large enterprises versus small enterprises, typically you see right now a lot of shift happening. Even now, it's trickling down to the smaller organizations, but a lot of the larger organizations they've been in a way forced to implement more security controls, and that's kind of why, like I mentioned earlier, they're a harder target because typically it's regulation. If they operate within any kind of regulated industry, there's regulations saying, okay, in order for you to continue to operate, you must meet XYZ requirements. And for a long time, that was the case. I think what we see now, at least especially in the US, is that's changing dramatically. If you look at the impact for cyber insurance. If you're an organization and you want to have cyber insurance has for a long time been losing money on those cyber insurance policies because they're having to pay out a lot more than what they're taking in those premiums. And so now what they're doing is forcing more and more requirements in order to get a policy. You have to have, for example, EDR and MDR is now becoming more of a topic within that. And what was interesting is I had a conversation with another MSP partner recently, last week, as a matter of fact, and they were talking about a customer of theirs that had been attacked that had opted to not accept MDR until after an attack happened. And what was interesting about that case is I'm familiar with the process. You know, you have an attack, cyber insurance gets engaged, they bring on resources to help kind of clean up, remediate the immediate impact, right? What was unique in the situation is after the cleanup, the cyber insurance then conducted an audit. They had a third party provider come in and do an audit to say, okay, well, you cleaned it up, but did you actually clean it up? And what are you doing now to make sure this doesn't happen again? Because now the cyber carrier, the insurance company, is still out on the line for future damages. And that was unique. That's the first time I've heard of that. And rightfully so. I mean, you think about it, that's a lot on the line, and you want to make sure that the organization that isn't putting themselves back on at risk there. So I think that trend will continue. That's been a big shift into the awareness of business owners of, hey, yeah, these risks are real, and sure, you can get cyber insurance, but those are requirements now with that. I think it's a pretty big trend. I see that we're going to see more acceleration in what that means and what impact that drives those business owners to do with them.
I think it's getting better, certainly in the UK, but not nearly good enough yet. I think organizations still think of cyber security, the protection measures, as an expense, I guess, rather than investment. Uh, and I've always thought the US is always a little bit in front or somewhat in front of the UK. In your experience in the US and other parts of the world, how would you convince people to think that actually this isn't an expense, this is an investment?
I think that the awareness comes to play a lot in that. And I think a lot of the organizations, you think about it, it's like, okay, well, it's an expense because it's something it is new. They don't see an immediate ROI on it, and it is hard to quantify ROI in terms of cybersecurity because it's like you're putting these investments in order to make sure these bad things don't happen, and that is often a difficult conversation to have because you don't want to sell on FUD, the
Yeah.
fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You want to share on awareness. So having these conversations and sharing of, hey, here's the attacks that we're seeing globally, or even regionally, or within an industry, it kind of brings it closer to home. Say, okay, hey, here's a smart thing to do. Uh, MFA, multi-factor authentication. If you're going to have remote access, absolutely a must. Even for your Office 365 environments, absolutely a must. Why? Because these stats say these organizations who do the right thing and do put these in place, they minimize their risk by X percentage. That's education. That's awareness of the situation. And it's funny that you mentioned like the US being a little bit ahead. Sometimes I think that's the case, but I don't think it's that far ahead. I think that in some cases, maybe more ahead because those attacks are common. Like they're happening more. You have a pretty large attack surface, and so those attacks are making it well known, and so there's a lot of publicity in those. So maybe ahead in those cases. Um, I mean, but even if you look at some of the regulation that pushes those changes, like in Europe, GDPR, and some of the other regulations and frameworks are being put in place. That's rapidly increasing the awareness because now you have to, as an organization, as a business, you have to comply with these. Otherwise, you face steep fines. And so, in a way, you can want to quantify ROI based off of fines that you're offsetting. That's also hard, but it is that awareness of what is the real attacks and the trends there to know that we're making smart decisions. It's kind of like driving a car. Um, I guess I'll say that in reference to the US. If I'm operating go ahead.
I was just going to love car analogies, so you fire on.
Yeah. Yeah. So like if I'm driving a car in the US, I have to have insurance on my vehicle in case I get an accident and I damage somebody else's car. Well, that's a lot. So you insure it. But I'm aware of what the risks are. I'm not going to let my teenage son drive without insurance. I'm going to make sure that his car is protected. He's protected for the things that you plan to protect against. How do you protect against a teenage driver? Well, here, he went did a lot of, they do driver's education, so he goes through a course that learns, what the road signs means, how to operate a vehicle in, inclement weather, and then he has, practice. So I had to drive with him. He was the driver, I was the passenger, and he had to spend, I can't remember how many hours he had to log. It was over 100 hours, he had a log of that driving time because in those situations, he learns and I can teach him, it's like, "Oh, this happened because XYZ." Maybe they made a bad decision or, "Hey, you missed a sign back there that you really should have been paying attention to." But it's that experience, right? But what is that based off of? It's learned experience. I have, thousands of hours, been driving for how many years. You share that with that. It's awareness I'm bringing it to him. Same way, cybersecurity, we're bringing that awareness because you, David, and Grant McGregor, you have a lot of experience. You see a lot more of what's happening, sure, globally, but also within your region, within those industries that you operate within.
That's true, and the experience counts for a lot, and not just in IT, but every industry. And going back to your car analogy, and I just couldn't agree more. I mean, it's like having a car without a service plan, or having a car that you're not checking the tires regularly to make sure that they're inflated correctly, or the brakes work. And they're all preventative measures. And when you turn that around to, say, cybersecurity, and yeah, I think you talked to, you stole my sandwiches there. You said, but 2FA. So,
Mhm.
what other preemptive measures do you think small, medium enterprises should be looking at in line with the, are the brakes fine, or you got a service plan?
I think that's great 'cause it's funny, my son just turned 16, and so it was, that time of so in the US, youth kids are able to get a driver's license at 16 years old if they meet the requirements of the training, the log in the time, and so, I bought him a vehicle and I bought him a truck, and as I was buying that truck, I said took it to the mechanic 'cause I'm not a car guy, I'm not a mechanic. I took it to the mechanic and had them check it over and say, "Okay, let's assess the situation of this truck." And what are the things it's going to need right now that are safety, related, and what are the things that are more cosmetic or improvements that we can put off for a little while we get some use out of it. And so the mechanic came back and gave me a report. It was very detailed. I was very surprised. It was very detailed, had a lot of pictures, and had a lot of comparisons. Like, for example, one of the things they mentioned was tires. I think two of the tires had nails in them. One tire was extremely worn, and it really boiled down to there was one good tire on the truck. The rest of them need to be replaced. And even that good tire was, he's like, you probably have 6 months on this tire. You're going to have to replace it as well. The brakes were in good shape, but the brake fluid was not. The engine coolant was not. And there were some other more longevity prevention things that needed to be done to make sure the long life of the truck. So I said, okay, with that knowledge that I now have from somebody who is an expert, I took that information and went over with my son to also educate him. He's not writing the check for it. I'm writing the check for it.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, here's what you need to know as a vehicle owner. The things we need to prioritize is tires. You can't drive with flat tires, so those are immediate. The prevention things on the engine and the brakes, those are safety. We're going to do that immediately. And there was cosmetic things like some things on the radio, the engine. I'm sorry, the radio. There were some buttons that didn't work. There were some headlamps that weren't great. They work, but they could be improved. So those we're going to put off. We can do those ourselves, but right now we're going to go ahead and have the mechanic who is an expert. We're going to have them do these, and so that begins with that assessment. So as a business owner, you're a professional. You're an expert. You're a SME in the topic of the business you run, whether you're a law firm, a bank, whatever, those are expertise. So when you look at assessing, okay, what's my risk? What do I need to focus on? You really got to bring in an expert to do that. So organizations like yourself, service providers, do have that expertise. You have a team of people who have expertise, and you have the tools. Like my mechanic, when I went, they have a whole shop and, they're able to lift the truck up, do all these assessments. If I were to try to do that assessment myself, even if I knew how, it would take me days to even get the truck in the position for you to use that because I don't have the tools for that. So organizations, that's where service providers like yourself come into play to really assess, using your knowledge, using industry standards. For example, the measurement on the tires, it's a measurement of how the thickness of tread, how much tread is left. That's an industry standard. The mechanic didn't make it up and say, "Hey, I think you really should change it at this thread depth." No, it's a recognized standard. You're relying on somebody else who has an organization, a governing body that makes those recommendations. So same thing as from the cybersecurity perspective is start with an assessment. What are those things that are the most critical risk to organization? MFA, easy, easy. We all know it. We hear it every day in the news. We know that users don't always create great passwords. We know that users often use the same password in different locations. And if they do rotate it, they're usually not rotating it, but maybe just changing it one number in the sequence. And so attackers know that. So introducing technologies to mitigate that, MFA, is large. It's a great improvement in security. Whereas maybe maybe rolling out an entire different application that's going to be larger investment, longer term. Will it have an impact on security? Sure. You want to make sure you're staying current. But in the media, maybe it's hey, let's make sure those patches are applied. The most current patches from that vendor from that application are installed. Those are those immediate assessments. But that's where you really security is a holistic view, not just a single aspect view of the organization. It comes into play as what is the business doing, what applications are they using, what systems are they using to really assess what the risks are and what they should prioritize.
Yeah, that's just so true. It's very good observations, and I think I do love car analogies. I think from our perspective, from an MSP perspective, we provide a single people-centric service that will mitigate against threats and risks to say a standard vehicle, but not all vehicles are the same as you said. So that one size does not fit all. It'll fit most organizations to a point, but then that assessment is key. That you're assessing somebody that might have a truck compared to a small saloon, and that's different needs. So, and also people have different risk thresholds, don't they, as well? Organizations have more risk than others. Uh, they might be just by nature more risk adverse because they're in the financial sector, as a good example. Or as we're finding in the UK, that sort of the retail sector seems to be being hit a little bit more hard than other sectors. But it's, yeah, an assessment. And then what's great about the UK, I think we've said this before, ZB, is uh, we have Cyber Essentials. So, there's already an assessment, a framework that we can scope and assess customers with, and then finding out where the gaps are, and then applying, a good methodical uh, technology and advice and understanding what the risk profile for that customer is. But you're right, there's some basics there, isn't it? Good password hygiene, security awareness training, 2FA, two-factor authentication, and we're seeing more and more organizations looking at manage, detect, and response. Uh, and from us, that's through Bitdefender. So that organization having somebody like us, but critically a larger company, a larger enterprise like Bitdefender having their back that is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in the background, which is just a fantastic place for our security and our customers' peace of mind as well.
Well, I think it's important to realize is, managing the things that you can manage and knowing where you can scale, where you need external resources. And so, like you mentioned, MDR, the managed detection and response is like to be able to do that right. There's a difference between doing it versus doing it right. And
Yeah.
and doing it means just somebody's looking at alerts, but doing it right means that somebody who's very well trained who knows how to differentiate between the noise and the actual attacks, and you're providing that service 24/7 and the capacity to do it for multiple. One of the things that when I was in my MSP, we had 25 dedicated security analysts that they were working all kinds of things within our security infrastructure for the services we deliver to our customers. But even to that extent, 25 security analysts to manage multiple events at one time, that becomes challenging. We got to the point to where our team internally, we can manage one incident, no problem. We had the resources we could dedicate to a response on that. Two, stress the system. Three, not possible. Because when those incidents come up, that's a lot of resources you're dedicating to it. And so partnering with an organization, like in this case, Bitdefender, it's great. It's a global organization that has resources throughout the world that are 24/7 watching that and can support multiple incidents all at once across that customer base and make sure that they're able to reach containment as fast as possible to minimize the damages is critical. That's something that's a lot of value that you deliver to your organizations by integrating those systems and those solutions in there.
That is interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's as you said, uh, Bitdefender is completely aligned to be able to react to multiple incidents. And also, as you know, they have was it 3 locations around the world, so they follow the sun as well. So we love that. We love that they have our backs as well, so we can go to sleep at night knowing that they're working hard somewhere else in the world. The I mean, on your experience with, I mean, how can I put this? How can SMEs align their cybersecurity investment with these top areas identified for CISOs? I mean, what do you think about that?
It's again starting with that assessment because I think everything begins on okay, well, knowing what your risks are and then allocating those resources correctly and investing that in those resources. So if you think about like putting those initial protections in place is
Right.
like MFA, right? We make sure we have good, strong passwords. We're educating our staff. Those are all the different things that fall under the initial prevention, installing patches, to make sure that we're mitigating those vulnerabilities ahead of time. Those all fall under prevention. And then we look beyond that. It's okay, well, what's the next step? The next step from there becomes like detection, EDR, so endpoint detection and response. But then endpoint detection is exactly that. It's talking about the endpoints. If we look beyond that, if you think about modern organizations today, previously, historically, organizations had a server in the back room, all their files are stored there. It's not the case anymore. Most organizations today, their email, for example, is hosted somewhere. A large majority of the organizations within MSPs are storing their email within Microsoft 365. So it's cloud infrastructure, right? And then you think about it from like the impact COVID had and still has today. It has opened up this new world where your people may not even be in your office. And so where before we were, fortifying the defenses and the perimeter of a business, well, that perimeter is now is expanded. It's everywhere. So introducing different technologies like extended detection and response that brings in those extra sensors, those extra data points, because there's as much risk. And if you look at the stats on the attacks that happen against MSP customers, the customers of an MSP, over 90% of those attacks are happening on your cloud infrastructure, primarily Microsoft 365. So if you're only looking at the endpoint perspective, we're missing a large part of that attack surface, which happens to be in the cloud. And so being able to detect and pull that in, that's where you bring in is like, okay, if you have a 365 environment, that's probably a pretty big risk for you. And based on the risk, that's an area we need to put investments in to make sure that we're bringing that into consideration and investing those resources in there. And then it's not only just aligning with that. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Is it, hey, we're going to take David's word that these are the top three things we need to focus on securing within 365? It's like, well, not really. Like I mentioned earlier, it's like the mechanic, they rely on industry standards to tell you that the tire depth, the type of oil you put in the engine, those are all those different preventative things and maintenance things to ensure the safety of the vehicle. Same
Yeah.
thing, organizations like Brett McGregor, you're relying on these industry standards that exist, whether you're looking at CIS, Center for Information Security, they have their controls. Those are third-party organizations that define standards. In the US is the cybersecurity framework. You mentioned earlier, Cyber Essentials. There's these different frameworks and standards that are out there that allow your organization to make those recommendations based on data and not just, oh, it's my opinion that we should implement MFA. Well, no, that's actually standards information. So, but having that expert that can come in, assess where you're at, where your risks are, and deliver that, I think that becomes important to factor into that discussion on where you're making those investments.
Yeah, some good points there. And just rewinding back to that, the insurance topic that we talked about earlier, we're seeing certainly in the UK more and more organizations looking and adopting cybersecurity. From your experience, what are cyber insurance companies or insurance companies looking for as a prerequisite before covering the
Yeah,
organization?
that's a great topic and a rapidly evolving topic because initially when cyber insurance came onto the scene, it was cheap. It was very cheap policy, add on to your current policies. And yeah, your premium was minimal, your deductibles were pretty low, and there was just a basic questionnaire of, do you have antivirus? Yep. Okay. Here you go. We write your policy. And then I mean, I'm talking about what's this 2000 teens, when this was earlier in those conversations where it's super easy. Well, then the risk started coming and the ransomware payments started coming and the insurance companies started losing money. They were like, okay, well, this questionnaire is now an entire page. And if you look at now at that questionnaire from cyber insurance is pages long. In some cases, you have to have a third party verification of, yeah, you say you're doing MFA, or you actually show us a report. And so those requirements from cyber insurance have grown. Some of the common things are obviously MFA, especially when you're talking about cloud resources, VPN, any kind of remote access to resources. There's a question on there for MFA, EDR. So it's no longer just endpoint protection; it's EDR, the endpoint detection response. And for the last couple years, one of the common questions on there has become now MDR. Do you have MDR provider? And, those have been some of the most recent additions to those questionnaires, to verify. And then what's even more, complex in that is if an event happens and the company, the organization, the business makes a claim, at the time that the claim is made, then there's verification. Okay, when you filled out the application, you said you were doing MFA, you said you were doing, EDR, NDR. Were those in place at the time that the attack happened? If so, great, you're covered, no problem, we got you. If not, then there could be a denial of the claim, and that becomes very impacting to the organization because if you mentioned earlier, you look at the initial cost of the response, the containment to restore order, restore operations, that's significant because in some cases you may number one shut down the business for a few days. So that means you can't conduct business for a few days. Okay, you're wasting payroll, right? Maybe you're not collecting revenue from customers, you're not producing. So you have a loss of revenue, your expenses didn't go away, your expenses are still there. And now you have to pay for all these third-party resources to come in to, respond to that, to contain that attack, to restore your systems back to working order. Those costs dramatically increase. So the initial just get the business back online without a cyber insurance policy to cover that, those can be very dramatic just in the initial first week, 2 weeks of expenses.
Yeah, that's a good
So
point.
yeah, that's, becomes very important.
Yeah, I think people, I don't know. I mean, it's all part of education. I think for a good managed service provider should do their best to recommend the right solutions, the right assessments, etc., as we talked about, and lower the risk landscape for the customer. But at the end of the day, there's very large organizations that spend millions upon millions, and they still get attacked, and they're vulnerable. So, as you said, having that cyber insurance policy is great to have. You've got to meet the standard first. You can't just tick the boxes and pray. You've got to be honest. But also, what it's doing, and if there is an attack, you find yourself with ransomware. They're going to provide the experts and the coverage and the money to be able to help you get out of that black hole that you're in, especially for the first couple of weeks. I think that's really critical. Like all insurance, if your house burnt down, you're not going to have a new house built the next day. You need coverage to be able to go and rent a property, replace your property, and then rebuild. That's the same, isn't it, with cybersecurity insurance?
Yeah, I think that's a missing part people don't often think about. To give you a little bit of context, I live in East Texas. And East Texas, the area that I live in is called the Piney Woods. So you have a lot of pine trees, natural and and then also for lumber. But where you see a lot of times in some of these neighborhoods that have been around for a while, you have very, very tall pine trees and it all mixed in through the neighborhoods. And here last summer, there was a really bad storm that moved through and knocked down a lot of trees, and trees were all over the roads, but they were also in people's houses. And so one of my close friends, they had a tree fall in their house. Thankfully, they were okay. They weren't home when this happened. But like you mentioned, that the initial cost is like, well, your house isn't livable. You have to move out. So they ended up initially that first night, they were at a hotel. They were there for a few days before they got a, I think, don't think about a week before they got a temporary rental. And then it was months for, the insurance committee to do the assessment and then start working with contractors to do the cleanup and do the repairs. And so they were out of their house for months. And so, and that's a tree fall in the house. You think about the cyber insurance impact, the same thing. It's like, well, how long will your systems be down? Can you tolerate not being able to conduct business for a week, or however long. I don't know if it was made news. I'm sure it probably made news in the UK. The attack against Ingram Micro was it a month, maybe 2 months ago. They were unable to conduct sales for weeks. I can't remember how long it was. The amount of money that they lost on a daily basis from not being able to conduct sales was tremendous. It had an impact on stock prices, and so that's huge, huge. And then you mentioned earlier long-term impact. Well, long-term impact is if I'm a consumer for an MSP, because MSPs buy from Ingram Micro as well. If I'm buying from Ingram Micro and all of a sudden I can't, but I have a customer who's demanding, we promised, we committed workstations or software or whatever, and all of a sudden I can't buy it because they've suffered attack. Well, what am I going to do? It's supply and demand. I'm going to go to another marketplace and buy that equipment. Does that then shift your opinion on the reputation of a vendor, and then impact where you do business in the future? Probably so. Same thing as that would be, the same ratio or example within a small business as well.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, Ingram, I know that people that I know in IT that, they couldn't buy licenses from Ingram, so they bought from competitors. And guess what? It's quite easy, and maybe continue to buy from those competitors. But actually, in the UK for the summer, we had two or three food retailers in the UK that had substantial ransomware or cybersecurity issues, and they can open the shops or conduct sales. And I always think, yeah, you could. I think people are quite forgiven maybe with this when these happen. But if you're used to going to a certain shop to buy your breakfast or your lunch, and then that's unavailable because of a ransomware, you go somewhere else uh, and you go, "Oh, okay, that was good. The prices was good." But actually, it's habit. If it happens for a week or two, human nature says, "Oh well, I'm now developed this habit. I'll just buy my sandwiches from this shop." And I think the same is true with other industries. Certainly in the UK, it's not the long term effect isn't just the downtime or those loss of sales for those couple of weeks. It's the habit that people get into when they're transacting
Mhm.
services or products. So minimizing that, I think, is great. Cyber insurance, I think, is definitely a must. And actually, it's not the most expensive thing. I mean, everybody in the UK buys insurance for liability, from employee and employee liabilities and business liabilities. Just add it on, and away you go. You can sleep well at night. I think for these discussions, it's evident that invested in security, cybersecurity yields significant returns. I think, can you maybe elaborate on how small, medium enterprises can achieve such outcomes?
So looking at the risk, it goes back to that, and like, okay, as Patty mentioned, the food provider, and I was trying to remember which one it was. That doesn't matter. Lunch place that you wouldn't go to, you now have this opportunity. It's like, okay, well now I have to be forced to make something new, change something different. It's like that's yeah, like that opens your interest and says, oh, well maybe I do like instead of sandwiches, I like having this soup or this salad or something. But yeah, looking at outcomes, I think outcomes is it. Is it are we looking at the changes that we're making, or are we looking at the outcome that we want from those changes? And so I was having some conversations with some of my team earlier today about some data we're looking for, results we're looking for, and based off of that, it's like we can look at the direct impact. We're talking about webinars actually, and attendees. Like, okay, well, sure, we got these numbers, but that the numbers of attendees that wasn't the outcome we wanted. That's a that's a part of the process. The outcome was, did we influence the decisions? Did they then reach out and have conversations for us to continue the education? That's the desired outcome. And so when you look at it from cybersecurity, it's like, okay, well, what's the desired outcome? Is the desired outcome to not have our confidential information breached? Okay, well, what does that mean? Because sure, it could be putting measures in place like MFA. Well, maybe it's more advanced than that. Maybe it's number one, classifying, well, where is the confidential data? Is it stored in an Excel spreadsheet? Is it a application that hosts that information? Well, if it's an application, then we got to make sure that application is secure, because that's the outcome. Because the outcome we want is secure, confidential information. Part of that discussion could also be is like, well, do we need that information? And that's not a question that people often ask themselves is, do we need that confidential information? And you look at the impact from GDPR, it's like, well, if you don't need to have everybody's US, we call them social security numbers. I think there's equivalent in UK and Europe.
Yeah.
It's a yeah.
No.
So it's like, yeah, do I need to have that? So me as a vendor, Bitdefender, do I need to have your identification numbers? No, it serves no purpose. So number one, let's not collect it. That way we don't have to worry about it. Do I have to have your birthday? Not really. It might be good to know when your birthday is, just so I can send you a birthday card, but I don't need to know what year. And so it's like asking those initial questions is what's the outcome? If the outcome is prevent the compromise of confidential information, maybe it's classification, maybe it's knowing where it's stored at, maybe it's education. I just got done with our annual security training on the GDPR for Bitdefender, and it was some of those questions about if I don't need to have a spreadsheet that has this information, don't have it. Don't save it. And it's that awareness, that education to your staff as a small business to say, yeah, this information, it's not okay to download it. We store it in the system where we know it's secure, it's safe there. These other controls are in place. Maybe you've outsourced the risk because that service provider that provides the application, that vendor is they've demonstrated through maybe their SOC 2 report that says, hey, we have these critical controls in place to ensure the security and the availability of this data, that it's going to be secure and you don't have to worry about it because you're not storing that data on your systems as a small business. You're relying on the controls they put in place to store that. So, first, yeah, define what is the outcome that we want from these situations.
Great advice there, isn't it? I think
So you one more. I'll give you one more example on that real quickly. So desired outcomes. It's so you mentioned earlier the ransomware, the risk of ransomware. Okay, well, what is the risk? There's two different aspects when you look at ransomware. One is the availability of your data. So if you have all your data in order to conduct business is stored on your files, right? If a ransomware attack happens, well, you no longer have access to that data. So one aspect of that, how do you make sure that you have access to that? Well, backups. You secure your backups. They're offline. They're secure. They're separated from your production environment, so that if anything happens, whether mechanical or cybersecurity, you have a server failure or whatever, or maybe somebody just deletes a file accidentally. Well, you have a backup of it, right? We can restore the data. We're back in business. That's one aspect. The desired outcomes. We're not going to pay the ransomware because we don't need the key to unencrypt the data because we have a copy and we're okay with that. The second aspect is like, okay, well, if they took your data and now they're threatening to release it, well, that's a different discussion. But it's like, okay, recognize what is the outcome we're trying to do. Is it we're avoiding paying a ransomware payment? Well, how do you ensure you're able to stand confidently to say we're not going to pay your ransomware payment? Well, have a copy of your data. Make sure you can restore that data. Make sure you've tested your restores, that you do have all that data. And then if the ransomware has extorting you saying, "Hey, we're gonna go public with your information," well, you can pay the ransom to prevent them from doing that. but are they actually going to follow through with that? How many times have those malicious actors still accepted your paying for the ransom and still gone back and said, "Hey, you know what? You paid us $1 million. It wasn't enough. We want 2 million.
Yeah.
Are you going to pay 2 million?" Or do they still keep your data and they sell it to somebody else? So those are the different discussions to have there. What's the desired outcome?
Yeah, it's great because we were talking earlier about measures and how to protect that data, and in this last 10, 20 minutes is really sort of talk about the data itself because at the end of the day, you're right, that's what's being protected. It's put all the fancy tools in place, but really that's just protecting the data. And if you understand your data, you know do you need your data? Do you back up your data? Can you restore your data in a timely fashion as well? That's absolutely gold, isn't it? Because you can put all the best protection measures in place, have the insurance policies, but the old basics actually, which we used to do years and years ago, is a lot of it's about knowing your data, who can access your data, and is it backed up? But we kind of, not us, but as we all moved to the cloud, it seemed to feel like it was more complicated, when in reality it isn't. It's just those practices which seem to be embedded. When you used to sell a server, it was always a backup and backup software on a tape. And guess what?
Yeah.
People always used to test it, but that seemed to be now missed in generationally different now. I'm amazed when we take on new clients and we uh, are very adamant about putting backup software in for cloud backup, because guess what? Microsoft's not backing it up after 90 days. And, and most of the time it's fine, but some, new customers come to us, well, why do I need that? Microsoft do that. Well, they don't. They will provide the service as it was before, but they're not backing anything up after 90 days. Uh, so yeah, just I'm a big backup fan. Probably the last question I have is, how can companies, SMEs in particular, shift their perspective to view cybersecurity as a strategic investment rather than, as we talked about, a cost or nuisance, or something which is, what do I have to do? I mean, what's your thought on that?
So you started mentioning earlier about backups, and it was funny because like I thought back when my early days of being in IT and having the physical servers in the back room and rotating tapes and testing tapes out and how long those backups took. And, it's this awareness you mentioned. A lot of organizations think about like, where's your data? What's the data that's critical? There's so much data that's, whether today we move from our, file servers that are in on-prem to cloud resources, whether it's OneDrive or SharePoint, those resources that are online, and many organizations still think, like you said, well, it's Microsoft has it. That's fine. It's safe. It's like, well, maybe it's supposed to be available. There have been outages of Microsoft's environments, right? But also, what happens if the data is deleted accidentally and nobody remembers or notices it until a certain period of time? How do you get that data back? So having that awareness, but not only that, it's we used to have a conversation quite often about your RPO and RTO, your recovery
Yeah.
point objective. Like, how much data can you stand to lose, and how long can you be without that data? That becomes important in those discussions as well, because it used to be, it's like, okay, well, we have a significant amount of data, and we're rotating those tapes out on a daily basis. Well, we know we can go at least to last night's backup. We can get the data back. Well, how long is it going to take you to restore that? Some of those tapes they're large, they're massive. They take a lot of time to recover that data. And I don't think that has shifted within, as more and more of those resources go to the cloud, because now it's all happening magically in the cloud, and those have to become back to those conversations regularly of, where is your data? And often, you think about it from the strategic perspective, it's having a conversation as the service providers with those customers to understand, well, what is the business? Like, we have to know how the business operates, how they make their money, how they store their data, where the data is at, what is that sensitive data, because then that becomes a strategic conversation about, okay, in order for the business to continue to operate, application X, Y, and Z has to be available. And we know that where those applications are hosted, is it an application that's internal within our systems? Is it an application that's hosted by a vendor? where those are at. And then from there, the strategic part of that becomes, if we rely fully on this vendor to provide the application, what's their commitment to us in terms of their uptime, their backups? Third party risk is a huge part of the conversation. Should be a huge part of the conversation. Ask any of the big news stories if third party risk is a big deal for them. You know, you think about Target or Home Depot. They had some major losses from third parties. They thought they were doing everything right as the organization themselves. Third party risk comes into play and now becomes your risk as the organization. So that those strategic conversations and those investments is identifying where's your data, what's the security outcomes we want, and then ensuring that we're doing the best practices, following the expert guidance of those recommendations.
Some of the cyber attacks, ransomware attacks we see in the UK, certainly from third parties, supply chains as well, as you talked about earlier. And at Graham McGregor, we've been ISO 9001 and 27001 compliant for a number of years now, and that certainly has taught us to be very aware of, software vendors that we work with for our solutions, that we are constantly holding a risk register of them, assessing, their product, how to integrate with us, who's managing it, does it have compliance to standards, is it backed up? Because that's what we're relying on, right? So, you're right that most organizations in the world, most SMEs will have a cloud application or a third party application that they're running their business on. And I think, the majority of them are just putting their faith and trust that it's just going to be fine, rather than ask those pointy questions.
Yeah. And so that's where those third party audits come into play. Like, you know, if you're heavily relying on those service providers, and I commend you as an MSP who's taking those steps to reach those certification standards of the ISO 9001 and 27001. Not many service providers do that. You think about why it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work to reach those.
Wow.
But it gives you, as that service provider, a large visibility into what the experience is for your customer. So it makes you more aware, more knowledgeable into what the process is going to be for them to help them ensure that they meet those requirements as well. So, yeah, those are commend you for that for doing that. That's a lot of work, and not one that many people take on.
I think what we've taken away from that is, and actually it brings us nicely onto cybersecurity. It's a culture thing in any organization when you're working with new compliances or cybersecurity. The only way all of that works is if the culture is aligned to the business goals, objectives of the business, that they're going to work towards security defenses or compliances such as ISO or Cyber Essentials in the UK. And actually, we see that, and I say that often, that you can put the best technology controls in place to mitigate against risks, but the human firewall is still the weakest point. I mean, the poor person in every organization is trying to do their day job, trying to do it productively, and then they have all this cybersecurity stuff getting in the way. But and we've got to help them help themselves. But that's where I think culture is definitely is king.
Culture and continuing with that, then it's important to share the why. Like, why are we doing this? Why does it matter?
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, look, I think we're well past an hour here. So, look, thank you for your insights, Zibi, and your time. I know you're a busy person, and I know you got some projects that you've been working on with internally at Bitdefender. So, thank you for giving up your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here and glad to share. I think
Yeah,
that's important for all the organizations. So happy to do it.
okay, look, I appreciate that. So, thank you, and yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right. You as well.
Thanks.